Erev Tov, everyone, and welcome to the House of Seven Beggars. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the House of Seven Beggars, therefore it must be Zeyde's Story Corner. That's right, Zeyde's Story Corner. And we are going to be continuing with our book, the classic Hasidic tales by Mayor Levin, and as it says from the retold from the Hebrew, Yiddish, and German sources. So we should see who's in the chat room. Yes, we should. Let's see. We've got no one. Yeah, that's right. Okay. No one in the chat room. It's a first. Yes, it is. This is got to be a first. I mean, we know there are a few people watching, but nobody is in there. Oh, there we go. We got Kelsey Lynn is in the chat room. Okay, she's first one in. Okay, so Mazel Tov. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a little unusual. We don't. We usually have at least a few people, and the others come in later. Yes, and the other ones always come in later. So. But we're not going to let that bother us. We are going to. Now Susan has joined us, and Richard is back. I see Richard. Richard was here, and then he disappeared for a minute, and now he's back. Yeah, and now he's back. Okay, so they're starting. They're coming in. So fashionably late. Yeah, fashionably late. Okay, so. Last week we left off with a cliffhanger, didn't we? Yes, we did. Yeah, that was a good way to end it. Yeah, it was. We were going on one of the stories about the Baal Shem Tov, and we got to a point. It's a long story, so we got to a point, and Zeyde decided he was gonna end it there on a cliffhanger to kind of make sure everybody came back. So, Zeph's here. Okay, so we are good to go then. Okay, so should put me on my camera. Yeah, I should put you on your camera. So let me get you set up here. There I am. I am on my camera now. Okay, so we are going to pick up where we left off last week, where we were talking about the Baal Shem Tov. And he was, if you remember, he was traveling with the Rebbitzin, and they were beset upon by some robber. And the robber, he pretty nicely guy. He was cursing them and everything. And the Baal Shem Tov told him to sink into the ground, and he sank into the ground, cursing them all the way. So, the Baal Shem Tov asked the Rebbitzin not to divulge what she had seen to anyone. And the Rebbitzin had said, well, if I don't tell anyone, what is going to be my reward? So the Baal Shem Tov said, well, you will have rest in your grave. If anybody disturbs you, just call out my name, and I will protect you. Okay, so it goes on years and years later, and the poor Rebbitzin has died, and she is buried, and there is some meshagash in the town about the Jews, that they're blaming them for what is going on. And they decide that, well, they are going to go to the graveyard and they are going to pull up a Jewish corpse and they are going to burn it. So they go out to the graveyard and they grab the cemetery keeper, and they make him to show them where the holiest grave is. So he is naturally frightened. He goes running away from them, and he falls on the grave of the Rebbitzin, and he cries out to save him. And that is where we left off. Okay, so let us continue on with our story. This one is called The Secret Marriage. I am going to back up and I'm going to read the last paragraph just to remind everybody. So, then they went and seized the keeper of the cemetery, and they dragged him into the graveyard. "Where is the holiest of your graves?" they cried. "Tell, or you yourself will be used to light the pyre." They brandished their torches over his head. The Jew was frightened, as you might well imagine. He ran in terror and threw himself down on the grave of the Rebbitzin. "Save me, holy Rebbitzin," he cried. And that's where we left off last week. The peasant threw him aside, and they placed themselves around the grave of the Rebbitzin, and they began to dig. At first, she became restless at the sound of their digging. She stirred in her coffin, but she thought, perhaps they are digging another grave nearby. But the digging came closer to her coffin, and she felt the tight earth above her loosen. She became frightened and wondered what was happening. Suddenly, a spade struck her coffin. Then she remembered and cried out loud, "Rabbi Israel!" In the morning, the wizard and all her followers, his followers, were found lying dead upon the grave. After the master of the holy name had revealed his power to the Rebbitzin, he did not remain long in her house. He decided that he would go and claim his wife. Now remember, he had been promised a wife long before. So, then changing his rabbinical garments for the short jacket and heavy boots of a peasant, Israel started out on foot for Kut. He came to the city and went directly to the house of Rabbi Gershon. Now remember, Rabbi Gershon is the brother of the woman and the son of the rabbi who he promised the Baal Shem Tov for his daughter. Rabbi Gershon was deep in study over a difficult problem in the Torah, and he did not notice that a man had come into the room. But when he had finished reading, he looked up and saw what a peasant was standing there. He was not pleased with the man. He cried out, "What do you want?" Rabbi Israel, speaking gruffly like a peasant, said, "I have come to take my wife." "Who is your wife? Who are you?" "Your sister is my wife. I am Israel, son of Eleazar." "How can it be that my father pledged my sister to a peasant?" thought Rabbi Gershon. "She could marry into the richest of families, or she could be wedded to the most celebrated of rabbis." Yet he did not want to distrust the wisdom of his dead father. He looked upon Israel and asked him, "What is your profession?" "I am a lime burner. I work in the hills." "No!" cried Brother Gershom. "It cannot be that you are the man." Rabbi Israel showed him the contract. Then Rabbi Gershom called his sister. "Here is the man to whom your father betrothed you," he said. "You see, he is a peasant, an ignorant lime burner. It cannot be that your holy father betrothed you to an ignorant boor. Let us send him out of the house." But the girl said, "My father made a marriage contract for me, and I will keep it. I cannot have a peasant in this house," said the Rabbi Gershom. Got the page stuck, huh? Yes, I got a page stuck. Okay. Break the contract. I will pay him money and he will go away. Israel said, I have come for my wife, not for money. Break the contract, said the Rabbi Gershon, or marry him and go out of this house. I will marry him and go away with him, said the woman. Israel took his wife with him into the Carpathians, the mountains that is, near the village of Zeyde, but he built a cabin for them to live in. He worked as a lime burner, and his wife helped him. Now you have to understand that is a very tough profession for anybody to do. It's a lot of heavy schlepping and stuff like that. So, it's a lot of work. So this Baal Shem Tov Yisrael, son of Eliezer, he was no weakling. So, thus they earned a scant livelihood. But sometimes Israel would take dry bread in a sack and go away into the hills. He would remain by himself all week long before the Sabbath. He would return home. He would remain at home during the Sabbath, and during the following week, again, take bread and wander among the high hills, contemplating God. In those mountains, too, there were many robbers. They had their forts in the forest, and they sallied out in bands to attack wealthy travelers on the roads. Once hidden among the trees, a number of these bandits saw a form of a man who walked on the ledge of a mountain peak. A chasm lay between the cliff he walked upon and the next mountain. The man seemed absorbed in thought. He did not look where he walked. He will surely walk off the cliff. He will fall into the chasm, the bandits cried to one another. They could not move, but watched him. Then they saw the two mountains move together and close the chasm between them. The master stepped safely from one peak to the other peak. And when he had passed, the mountains separated behind him, and were as they had been, with the chasm lying between them. When the robbers saw this happen, they said to one another, He must be a holy man. No kidding, guys. Then they ran toward him and said, Be our judge. Rabbi Israel answered, If you will promise never to injure a Jew, I will be your judge. They agreed. I live in a cabin near Zeyde, he said. When you need a judge to decide your quarrels, come to me. Once two of the thieves, quarreling over the division of their spoils, they came to Rabbi Israel in his cabin and asked him to say which of them was in the right. Together they had stopped the carriage. One of them had held the horses. The other had beaten the fat merchant and robbed him of his coffers. I nearly killed the merchant, he bragged. The better share of the money belongs to me. But his companion declared that the spoil should be evenly divided. The Baal Shem Tov said, The second man is right. The spoil should be evenly divided. The robbers accepted his decision and returned to their fort. But the killer was not content. After he had given his companion half of the money and jewels, he felt even more angry. When night came, he decided to revenge himself upon the Baal Shem Tov. He took his knife and he went out on the mountain. He went to the forest and came to the Baal Shem Tov's cabin. He opened the door and went into the room. He saw Rabbi Yisrael sleeping. The robber stood over the bed and raised his knife to strike the sleeping rabbi. Oh my goodness. Suddenly the bandit was assaulted from behind. His arm was seized. He felt blows descend upon his shoulders. He was beaten with fists and with cudgels. That's like a bat. He was beaten as by 10 strong men until he lay groaning on the ground. His head was covered with blood and his body was blue with bruises. And still, he saw no adversary. He thrust his arms wildly into the air to catch at the bodies of those who were beating him. He tried to seize their sticks. He swung his arms all around him. But he encountered only emptiness. And yet, the blows continued to descend upon him. Then he roared with a loud pain. The Baal Shem Tov awoke. "What is it?" he asked. "Who is shouting here?" He looked and saw the beaten highwayman with his knife in his hand, laying on the ground. Then he knew what happened. Rabbi Yisrael got out of his bed, went and fetched water, and washed the robber's wounds. After having lived 7 years in the Carpathians, Rabbi Yisrael and his wife returned to Rabbi Gershon in Kut. Rabbi Gershon still believed that his brother-in-law was an ignorant peasant and of no use in the world. He did not know what to do with him. At last, he thought of a plan. "Can you drive a carriage?" he asked of Rabbi Yisrael. The Baal Shem said that he could drive. "Often I have to go to the neighboring villages to render judgments of Torah. You will drive my wagon." So, the Baal Shem Tov became a coachman for his brother-in-law. Once, they went on a journey. When they had been riding for several hours, Rabbi Gershon fell asleep. Rabbi Yisrael was absorbed in contemplation and forgot to guide the horses. The reins were slack in his hands. A bull came charging along the road. The horse was frightened and he jumped sideways and pulled the wagon into a ditch. Rabbi Gershon lay bruised in the mud. "God has cursed me," he said, "with a brother-in-law who is good for nothing. He can't even drive a horse." Then Rabbi Gershon decided that he could not abide to have his brother-in-law living in the same village. "What can I do with him?" he thought. "My sister will go with him wherever he goes. I cannot let them starve." At last, he decided, "I will set him up as a tavern keeper." So Rabbi Gershon inquired and found that there was a place named Iturup near Koso. There was an inn that could be bought very cheaply. It was a poor sort of a place, as few travelers passed on the road. Even an experienced tavern keeper could barely earn his bread there. Rabbi Gershon rented the tavern and gave it to his sister and his brother-in-law. There was very little to do in the tavern, but the spot was a beautiful spot, lonely and wild, covered with trees and crossed with running streams. Oh, sounds like a pretty place, huh? Behind the house, the master found a spring of water amongst a core of trees. He set to work and carried stones and built a mikvah around the spring. That purifying bath is still there to this day. Near the mikvah, he built a hut where there were no people to serve in. When there were no people to serve in the tavern, he would retire to this hut and remain there days long in meditation. When travelers came to the tavern, his wife would call his name, and he would come back to the house and serve his guests, make their beds for them, and bring them food and drink. And still, no one knew who he was, for he kept his power hidden. Once, Rabbi David of Klama, who was a friend of Rabbi Gershon, went through the country to gather gifts for the Hanukkah feast. When Rabbi David came to Kut, Rabbi Gershon said to him, "If you pass near Kaso, go to my brother-in-law's tavern at Itrup and stay with him. And on your return, tell me news of my sister." "Is your brother-in-law a learned man?" asked Rabbi David. He is an ignorant peasant," said Rabbi Gershon bitterly. Rabbi David came to the Baal Shem's tavern. Israel was not in the house, but was alone in his hut in the woods. His wife called to him, crying, "Israel, we have a rabbi for a guest." At once, Rabbi Israel ran to the house. He took a chicken and killed it and cooked it for Rabbi David. While Rabbi David ate supper, Israel went and made his bed. And all through the evening, while the visitor spoke to the woman of the wisdom and fame of her father and her brother, Rabbi Israel sat quietly behind the oven. At last, Rabbi David went to sleep. Then Rabbi Israel took the Torah and began to read. The Baal Shem Tov never slept more than 2 hours a night. Many nights he did not sleep at all, remaining awake over the Torah. Now, as he pierced deeper and deeper into the pure realm of wonder, the darkness that was about him gave way, for light seemed to stream from Rabbi Israel. He did not have a lamp for his reading. He read by the illumination that hovered about him. And still the light grew and glowed and became bright as a flame. Rabbi Israel sat in the midst of it. His soul was warmly bathed in the divine fire. His soul was filled with ecstasy. Suddenly Rabbi David awakened. He saw the flame in the corner of the room. He leapt from his bed. He ran to call the tavern keepers. But only Rabbi Israel's wife was in their bed. Rabbi David awakened her, shouting, "Quick, the house is on fire!" But the Baal Shem's wife looked where there was light and smiled and said, "If you believe there is fire, put it out." Silly man. Reb David ran and got a pail of water and carried it to the oven. But as he was about to pour out the water, he saw Israel sitting there in the midst of the shining light. And he saw his aesthetic face. Rabbi David did not understand everything, but he knew that this was a holy man. He was silent. He set the pail down noiselessly. He crept back to his bed, closed his eyes. But all night long he could not sleep. He saw before him the aesthetic face of the Baal Shem Tov as he sat, bathed in the light of heaven. When Rabbi David returned to Kut, he went to Rabbi Gershom and said, "I stayed at the tavern of your brother-in-law." "How is my sister?" asked Rabbi Gershom. "She is well." "And my brother-in-law, does he help her about the tavern?" Rabbi David said, "Your brother-in-law is holier than you." Rabbi Gershom laughed. "He can't even drive a horse," he said. Rabbi Israel and his wife could not earn a living at the tavern. Rabbi Gershom did not help them anymore. "I will learn a simple way to earn a living," said Rabbi Israel. He went to Tlust and worked for a butcher there and learned to be a shochet. That is a person who butchers meat for kosher meat. But after he returned, and that's an interesting story. Did you know that the shocheting knife that they use today was actually invented by the Baal Shem Tov? Well, it was. But back to our story. After he returned with his wife to Brody and became a shochet in Brody. When Rabbi Israel was 36 years old, the voice of God came to him and said, "The time has come for you to reveal yourself." Then the master of the name began to perform wonders. And we are now at our halfway point of our time together. The next story is a really good story. It's called The Bride in Her Grave. And I will tell you something when we come back about this story. That is a very, very famous story, and you may actually recognize it. So, we shall take our 6-minute break, and then we will return, and we will continue on with the stories. So everybody, stay tuned.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back. Glad you all stuck around. I see Guy has joined us. Hello, Guy. How are you doing? Okay, so we are going to finish. Well, actually, we are going to continue on with these stories. We're not going to finish them. It's going to be a long time before we finish. But anyway, we are going to continue on with our stories from the classic Chassidic tales. You know, this is an old book. Yeah, it probably is. Well, not so old. Well, I mean, it was originally written in the 1930s, and then it was reprinted. This book that we have right here is reprinted in the 1970s, late 1970s. So it's not a young book, but it's not a real old book either. And you know how I can tell? How can you tell? Look at the price. $3.95. That is an old book. Okay, so let us continue on. This is the story is called The Bride in Her Grave. Now, you may recognize this story. This story is actually the basis of a movie that came out a number of years ago. It was very, very popular with the Kinder. It's called The Corpse Bride. The Corpse Bride was based on this story right here. Okay, so we are going to go on with The Bride in Her Grave, a true story of how the Baal Shem Tov brought back a bride from the other world. Okay, so we start now. Soon, the whole world knew of the wisdom of the power and the power of the Baal Shem Tov. From all the corners of the Carpathians, followers came to him. Often he went on journeys to far places to which the will had called him. And there are stories about some of these trips that he took. But we will get to those later. Once, on a Wednesday night, Rabbi Yisrael arose and said, "I must go away for Shabbat." He went into the barn and harnessed his horse. Several of his followers sprang after him and begged that he take them with him. But he allowed only a few of them to come in his wagon. "Where will we hold Shabbat?" they said. "In Berlin, in the house of a wealthy Jew." Though they knew that with swift horses, it took more than a week to reach Berlin, they did not question the rabbi, for the master was not confined in the bounds of time or space. The Baal Shem Tov let his little horse walk slowly along the byway all that evening, and at midnight the wagon stopped before a tavern. "Let us stay here tonight," said the Rabbi Yisrael. The tavern keeper welcomed them into his house, for he saw that they were holy men. "Perhaps they will honor my house and remain over Shabbos," he said. But Rabbi Yisrael answered, "We must hold Shabbat in Berlin." The innkeeper looked at him. Probably kind of like that, kind of like, "Are you kidding me?" Anyway, the innkeeper looked at him and did not understand. The rabbi said, "On Shabbat Eve, there is to be a wedding in the house of a wealthy Jew in Berlin. I must be at the wedding in order to read the service and bless the bride." "But you must have a wonderful horse," said the tavern keeper, smiling. "My little horse will get me there in time," said Rabbi Yisrael. Oh, there is a wonderful story about this little horse, too. But that's for later. "In time for Shabbat after this one," answered the innkeeper, laughing. Why? Berlin is further than 100 miles away. If you were to travel day and night, sparing neither man nor beast, you might arrive in time for Shabbos after this one. But his words did not trouble the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Israel turned to his followers and said, "You are tired. Let us go to sleep." The tavern keeper could not sleep that night. He lay awake wondering how the rabbi would reach Berlin before the Shabbos fell. "This is Wednesday night," he said. "Tomorrow is a day, and Friday is only part of a day. No, I cannot understand it." At last he said to himself, "I will tell him I have things to attend to in Berlin, and ask him to take me there." When the Baal Shem Tov arose in the morning, the innkeeper ran to him, saying, "Shall I harness the horse for Rabbi?" "Not yet," said the Baal Shem Tov. "First we will pray, and after that we will eat our breakfast." "Rabbi," said the innkeeper, "I have business to do in Berlin. Take me there with you." "When we start, come with us in our wagon," said Rabbi Israel. The master and his followers said the morning prayers. This is their shacharit. And after that, they sat down around the table. They ate without haste. And while they ate, they discussed the Torah. A problem of judgment arose, and they sat for a long time discussing the problem. Meanwhile, the innkeeper ran and dressed himself for the journey. When he was ready, he looked into the room where the master sat with his students, and he saw them still absorbed in their discussion. "Half the day is already gone," thought the innkeeper. He heard Rabbi Israel's words. "Of every good deed we do, a good angel is born. Of every bad deed, a bad angel is born. In all the deeds of our daily life, we serve God as directly as though our deeds were prayers. When we eat, when we work, when we sing, when we wash ourselves, we are praying to God. Therefore, we should live constantly in highest joy, for everything that we do is an offering to God. And of those things that we do badly, work that we leave half finished, or thoughts that we leave uncompleted, malformed angels are born. Angels without heads. Can you imagine such a thing? Angels without heads. Angels with no eyes. Angels without arms. Without hair. Without feet. Therefore, no deed should be left unfinished." The innkeeper thought, if this is the way he travels to Berlin, the angel born of this ride will have perhaps the beginning of a toe and nothing else. But the rabbi and his students remained around the table talking. "I will tell you a story of a king," said the Baal Shem Tov. "There was a very wise king who had built for himself a strange and wonderful palace. In the center of the palace was a room in which stood the throne. Only one door led into the room. All through the place were passages and halls and corridors that turned and twisted about and led in every direction. There were endless walls without openings, and there were more corridors than more passageways. Then the palace stood finished. The king sent an order to all of his lords, commanding them to come before him. He sat in his throne and waited. The lords came to the outside of the palace. They stared in wonder at the confusion of corridors. They said, "There is no way to come to the king." But the prince threw open the door, saying, "Here he sits before you. All ways lead to the king." Then Rabbi Israel added, "So we may find God." In the afternoon, the Baal Shem Tov called the tavern keeper. "I will harness the horses at once," said the tavern keeper. "No, not yet. First we will eat the evening meal." Then the rabbi and his students sat down again and ate largely and well. As evening came, the rabbi himself went to the barn and harnessed the horse and the wagon. "Now we will go," he said. The innkeeper got into the wagon with them. "At last I will see what manner of horse he has here," he thought. And he bound his cloth around his throat, for he thought, "A great wind will come because of our swift ride." The little horse began to walk. At first, the tavern keeper saw that they were going along the same road on which his tavern stood. Every house along the way he knew, and every tree. But as the darkness grew like sleep around his eyes, he was no longer sure where he rode. First there seemed to be no more houses. Then there seemed to be no more people. And at last there seemed to be no more trees. He was awake. He listened. And yet he could not distinguish the hoofbeats of the horse. The wagon moved silently through the darkness, smoothly, as if floating on the surface of glass. The air was tender about his face, and there was a sweet odor in his nostrils. He thought to himself, "Perhaps I am not here at all." Then he felt the Hassid who sat next to him in order to make sure that this was no vision. "Where are we going?" he said. "We're going to Berlin. But I do not recognize the road." The Baal Shem Tov said, "This is the shortest way." All night long they rode, and the tavern keeper saw no light of habitation, saw nothing but the stars in the velvet sky, and heard nothing but the voices of Chassidim as they talked of things in the Torah. The rabbi himself spoke of many wonderful things. he spoke of the prophet Eliyahu, who wanders about the world, and of how at the time of redemption he would bring down Mashiach, and then at last the Shekhinah, the glory of the living God, will cease her wandering and unite again with him. No man can hasten the coming of that day, said the master of the word. Even the mightiest of words cannot bring down that day as long as evil is among us. Toward the dawn, the innkeeper began to hear the hoofbeats of the horse. Then he felt the wagon jolting on the road. He saw the trees. He saw houses. He saw that they were near a great city. And when they rode into the city, he saw that it was Berlin. The tavern keeper remembered that the Baal Shem Tov had said he was going to the house of a wealthy Jew to perform a wedding service. But now, instead of driving to the street on which stood the house of the rich, the rabbi stopped before a humble guest house and went in there with his students. And they said the morning prayers. They sat themselves down at the table. The tavern keeper wandered out into the street. He was restless and filled with the news of the marvelous ride he had taken, and he wanted to find someone to tell of the great wonder. He came to the street of rich houses. Each house was a veritable palace, and one of the houses he saw was festooned for a great feast. As the tavern keeper stood before the house, the door opened and a young man came running out of it. Though he ran in great haste, he did not seem to know where to go, but turned first one way and then the other. His face was terribly wrought with grief. The tavern keeper saw the young man was wearing Shabbos clothes and new shoes. He is certainly the bridegroom, he thought. The bridegroom ran up to the tavern keeper and said, "Where is there a doctor?" The tavern keeper seized his arm and cried, "Come, I know of a rabbi who works wonders." But the bridegroom stood still, repeating to himself, "Of what use will it be? She is dead." The tavern keeper could not contain himself. He cried, "The rabbi can do all things. He came 100 miles in one night to perform a wedding in Berlin." The bridegroom said, "The bride is dead." The tavern keeper said, "His powers are so great, he can surely raise people from the dead. Come, I will take you to him." The bridegroom put out his hand, and the innkeeper led him to the Baal Shem Tov. And that is where we are going to stop for this evening. Oh, I love doing that cliffhanger. Okay, so let us go on to the other camera, huh? Okay, let me switch the cameras here. You seem to really be enjoying these cliffhangers. Oh, I'd love to do that. It gets people to come back all the time. Yes, I hopefully they will. And I hope that you'll tell people of the videos and show them to your children, to your grandchildren, to your nieces, to your nephews, to all the kinder. That would be good. I'm sure they would love to hear your stories. Okay, so we have just about come to the end of our time. and we will be back on, let's see, Wednesday night with the Torah study with myself and Reb Ruvain, and we will continue our in-depth study of the Torah. You have a little story yourself. What is that? About your wife. Oh, that's true. Yeah, yeah. She is not here. No, she is not here. She is house sitting, as she does every year. She house sits for her cousin while they go traveling, whether it's to go to Florida or go to China or go to Paris or something like that. They go all over the place. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But they work very hard to get to this point in their life. So I'm glad they are actually enjoying it. But to get back to the story. Ah, yes, to get back to the story. Okay, so last week, my wife packs up the car and she goes to go down to her cousin's house. And it's about that's about 70 miles away. It's a little bit of a drive. Yeah, it's a little bit of a drive. Not too bad, but it's a little bit of a drive. So a couple of days later, because I've been working and I really had no reason to go anywhere, so finally I had to go decide I had to go to the store, and I went to get my car keys, and what happened? No car keys. No car keys. No car keys. No keys of any kind. So what did you do? Well, I called my wife and I asked her if she had seen my keys. And she asked me if I'd looked here and if I'd looked there. And I said, yeah, I've looked there and everything. And while she was questioning me, she was going through her purse. And guess what she found? Your keys. My keys. So she had her keys and she had my keys. So she's got all the car keys. She's got the house keys. She's got the keys for the shed. She's got the keys for the storage unit. She's got all the keys that we need. She's got the mailbox keys. So what are you doing? So I asked her to go to the post office, which is right near there, and I said, mail them to me. What they mail them? They're going to go into the box. Well, no, I told her to mail them to me, signature required. That way the postman will have to bring them to the house. So that way I can get my keys back. And fortunately, I had another set of keys here for the car, but no other keys. So I'm at least able to get around when I need to go visit. Yes, to go visit my aunt and go to the store and stuff like that. But we should have our keys back tomorrow. He said it's not a very good story. Yeah, well, it's not really a very good story. I mean, there's probably a lesson in there somewhere. We're going to have to figure that one out. Yeah, we'll have to figure that one out. But in the meantime, we'll still be able to get to where we need to. We'll be able to go and see my aunt and make sure that she is okay and everything. And get to the store if we should have to get something from the store. But until then, till we get the keys, we'll just have to wait to see if there's anything worthwhile in the mail. So anyway, so I'm glad that you were all here today for our story. I hope you will return to be with us next week. So that we can finish the story. The story of the bride. Yes, the story of the bride. And don't forget that Wednesday night is the Torah study, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Until then, Leila Tov, everyone.